And then came midsummer. It was midsummer, a clear, shining midsummer day, but what was the matter with Malin? The whole morning she had been sitting in the grass behind the lilac hedge, writing in her diary, and when Johann tried to approach her, she snapped, without even looking up, "Go away." Thereupon Johann, snubbed, went back to his brother and reported, "She's still angry." "She ought to be thankful," said Nicholas. "Now she's got something to write about. She wouldn't have a diary at all if it weren't for us." Pele looked worried. "Perhaps she'd have more amusing things to put down then, things that she thinks are more fun, I mean." They looked anxiously across at Malin, and Johann said, "This time she's bound to write quite terrible things." "It was Midsummer's Eve yesterday," wrote Malin, "and a Midsummer's Eve I will never forget. But for safety's sake I will write down a few lines to remind me about it. Then I can pass it on to my daughter if I ever happen to." "Have one, and perhaps she will come home to me some Midsummer's Eve, and, bursting with happiness, will ask me, 'Did you have such a wonderful time when you were young, Mummy?' Then I will point sourly to a couple of yellowing pages in my diary and say, 'Just read for yourself what your poor mother suffered from your small, horrible uncles.' But actually, even the world's most frightful little uncles cannot spoil the beauty of a midsummer on Seacrow Island. The colors of the summer which is blooming around us now, nothing can destroy that. We go around in a cloud of perfumes, of saxifrage and clover. Marguerites nod in every ditch, and the buttercups shine in the grass. The pink froth of the wild roses covers our poor bare gray rocks, and violets grow in the crevices. Everything smells sweetly, everything is in full bloom, everything is summer, and the cuckoos and all the birds chirp and sing. The earth is full of joy, and so am I. High above my head the swallows dart while I sit here and write. They are nesting under the caves of Carpenter's cottage, and are close neighbors to Pele's wasps, although I don't think they have much to do with each other. I like the company of the swallows and the wasps and butterflies, but I would be grateful if you, Johann, would stop sticking your nose out from behind the corner of the cottage, because I am furious with you all and shall continue to be for a little longer, if I can. At any rate, until I have written this reminder of my first Midsummer's Eve on Seacrow Island. I was woken by singing. Dad was up early and was putting the last touches to the garden furniture, with an ordinary paintbrush this time. He was standing right below my window and singing quite beautifully. I jumped up and into my clothes, and saw that the bay was lying out there, blue and shining, and that my beloved brothers were up with nothing to do. So I made them come with me to Jensen's cow meadow. We returned home with our arms full of flowers and green leaves, and turned the whole of Carpenter's cottage into a leafy bower with summer perfume in every corner. And when the Seacrow Eye came steaming up the bay, she was like a floating leafy hut, decorated with young birches from stem to stem, from stern to stem to stern. Someone aboard was playing an accordion, and people in summer clothes were singing, just like Daddy, but not so beautifully. The whole of Seacrow Island was on the jetty, of course, for most people go down to meet the boat anyhow, and today it was midsummer. We were all there, all except Bjorn. I was looking elegant, most elegant, in my light blue dress with the full skirt. But Johann and Nicholas whistled when they saw me, and that must be the greatest compliment one can have, if one's brothers whistle when they see one. It shows there are some grounds for being pleased with oneself. So I felt very happy and full of expectation. Pele was not so happy. "Must we wear these horrible clothes just because it's Midsummer's Day?" he asked. "I suppose it isn't right to torture small children with Sunday clothes, but one gets tired of all those dirty jeans and longs to see something else now and then." "Yes, you must," said Daddy, "and after all it's not that bad. And if you're just a little careful not to get dirty and wet, you'll be on the safe side." "Tell me to be careful not to do anything that's fun, and then you and Malin will be on the safe side," said Pele. Then he suddenly saw Jorvin, who up till now had been seen dressed in nothing but jeans and a ragged little sweater. Here she was in a white embroidered dress, and her bearing was quite indescribable. One could see from a long way off that she thought, "Now you're really something. Now you're really seeing something." Even Bosun seemed subdued by this entirely new foster mother. Pele drew back shyly. Then Jorvin climbed down from the heights of her triumph and said, "Pele, what about it? Shall we throw sticks for Bosun? It's about the only thing we can do while we're dressed up like this." Perhaps, she said, this is to keep Pele away from Steina and Old Man Soderman, who was also on the jetty. Soderman told us that his stomach was better, which pleased us all, for here on Seacrow Island we all share each other's joys and sorrows. "Ha ha. Now some of the summer visitors will be arriving, ha ha," said Soderman. And when Daddy asked him if he didn't like summer visitors, he looked quite surprised. Evidently that was quite a new thought to him. "Like them, Pa," he said. "Most of them are only from Stockholm, and the rest are just rubbish too." Daddy laughed and did not seem in the least offended. He already considered himself a native, as he always does wherever he may be, and I think this is the reason why he has so many friends everywhere. Besides, people feel that with all his childishness, vagueness, and helplessness, he needs warmth and protection. Well, I don't know how he does it, but everybody likes him. I heard old Soderman say in the shop once when he had not noticed that I was there, "That man Melkerson isn't quite all there, but that's the only thing I have against him." However, be that as it may, back to the jetty. The Gronkivist Amazons, that's what Daddy calls Teddy and Freddy, were there in new jeans and red polo-necked sweaters. They and Johann and Nicholas were sitting on empty oil drums and croaking like cormorants now and then. They have some sort of secret club, those four, and go around being secret for days on end, which annoys the little ones beyond endurance, as they are not allowed to belong. Pele avenges himself by calling his brothers Secret Johann and Secret Nicholas, smiling scornfully when he says it, while Jorvin simply declares that it's a crazy club. After the behavior of the club last night, I agree with her wholeheartedly. As we stood there waiting for the boat to dock, Johann and Nicholas suddenly rushed forward, and each took one of my arms. "Come on, Malin, we're going home now," said Johann. I struggled, of course, and wondered what they wanted to do at home. "We can read an instructive book or something," said Nicholas. "You know you like being read to," said Johann. "Of course I do, but not in the middle of a lovely midsummer's evening," I told them. I found the explanation for it almost at once. The explanation came down the gangplank in all its glory, and it was none other than Krister, the boy who was on the boat the day we came here. I am accustomed to my brothers, hating anyone who comes and hangs out about Malin. Their words, not mine, but apparently right from the very beginning poor Krister has been more unpopular than anyone else. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with him. He is rather inclined to be sure of himself, but I would soon cure him of that. He is handsome enough, and wears what Daddy calls good clothes. As soon as he got off the boat, he came straight up to me. When he smiled, I thought he looked very nice, for he has lovely teeth. But Johann and Nicholas glared at him as if he had a wolf's grin. And no wolves allowed to come here and eat up our sister, no thank you. Poor little Malin, said Krister, all alone on Midsummer's Eve. Come along, and we'll turn Seacrow Island upside down. This remark did not make him any more popular with Johann and Nicholas. She's not alone, said Johann crossly. She's with us. Krister patted him on the shoulder. Yes, yes, now off you go to the sandbox with your buckets and spades. I'll take care of Malin. I think it was at that very moment that they declared serious war on Krister. I could see them gnashing their teeth. They went back to Teddy and Freddy, and immediately a frightful squawking arose from their direction, which sounded full of hate and revenge. Malin, this evening you and I are going to dance. I've already decided, said Krister, and when I explained to him that I was used to deciding for myself with whom I wanted to dance, he said, Decide for me, then we needn't have any arguments about it. There was no sign of Bjorn. Anyhow, I didn't know whether he danced, and I wanted to dance in my light blue dress, it being midsummer and everything, so I said to Krister, well, we'll see. However, it can be midsummer as much as it likes, but the higher powers have decreed that I have to be a mother to my 3 brothers, and I should certainly not have allowed the smallest one to leave me and go with Jorvin, at least not when he was in his Sunday best. Suddenly I heard everybody laughing, and I said to Krister, come and see what's amusing them all. And then what I saw was Pele, who was not to get wet. There he was, standing in the sea up to his waist. Jorvin too, and they were splashing water at each other as hard as they could. They were absolutely wild, there is no other word for it, and Jorvin shrieked, now we might just as well go swimming, and they did. They threw themselves in the water and came up shouting and splashing each other even more. They were absolutely sea-wild, and so absorbed in their own enjoyment that they had entirely forgotten the rest of the world around them. But they woke from their wildness when Marta and I came rushing toward them, woke and saw they were wet in the same sort of way as Adam and Eve saw that they were naked. But Pele and Jorvin, unfortunately, were not naked. They were dressed in their very best clothes, and I have never seen a well-starched party dress look more like a wet rag. We couldn't help it, said Jorvin. It just happened. She tried to explain to Marta how it just happened, and as far as I remember, this is what was said. We were just going to paddle, and we were ever so careful, but we were both looking so elegant. But Pele said we should at least go out as far as to the knees, and so we did. But then Pele went out a little farther. I dare you to go as far as this, he said. And so I went farther, and said, I dare you to go as far as this, then. But then I saw that the bottom of my dress was a bit wet, and I said to Pele, I'm not wet. And then he splashed a little water on me so that I would be wet. And then I splashed a little on him, and then he splashed a little on me. And then we splashed more and more and more and more, and then we just went swimming. That's how it happened. Well, anyhow, no more swimming today, said Marta sternly. We had to go home, each of us, with our sopping wet child, behind Carpenter's cottage. I have a clothesline strung between 2 apple trees. I hung up Pele's clothes on it, and there they danced their midsummer's dance, the only one they would have with the south wind. But next midsummer I'll have a clothesline twice as long, for it is obvious that it will be needed. More about that later. Marta and I both returned with our usual everyday children. and Marta said, "It will be a long time before I put Jorvin into a party dress again." "Can I be sure of that?" said Jorvin. Marta herself looked sweet in her national costume, with its pleated woolen skirt and big white scarf. Oh, that Marta who arranged the Midsummer Poll and the Midsummer Games on Seacrow Island. Marta, who is the president of the Housewives' Union. Marta, who is the leader of the choir. Marta, and who got the whole of Seacrow Island, every single person to dance around the Midsummer Pole. Marta, and no one else but Marta. The Midsummer Pole had been raised in the meadow behind Soderman's cottage, and when we got there it had begun to rain, for even Marta cannot regulate the weather. But her housewives collected bravely beneath their umbrellas and sang at the top of their voices, and I did too. And the earth was lovely and the sky beautiful, in spite of the rain. But dear God, hear the prayer of the birds, and let it clear up before evening, for there is one little female bird here who is longing to dance on the jetty. And so I did, but before that point was reached, a great deal had happened, and the clothesline between the apple trees was beginning to sag, for on it hung not only Pele's shirt, jacket, and shorts, but a shirt belonging to Krister, as well as Daddy's shirt and trousers, and Johann's shirt and trousers. I do not know what Nicholas's trousers had done not to be allowed to go swimming that whole day. All the other trousers were allowed to, but of course life is very unfair. Actually, Krister's shirt had not been swimming. I had washed it for him because he fell down during the egg and spoon race at the exact spot where Daddy had dropped his egg a minute before. Kind man that he is, Daddy went home and gave one of his own shirts to Krister. "Thanks," said Krister. "I'll go and have a swim while I'm waiting." Johann and Nicholas and the Gronkfist Amazons stood there giggling. No one could say that they seemed particularly sorry for Krister's misfortune with the egg. I heard Krister ask them where one could swim, and Teddy pointed. "Is it shallow there?" asked Krister. "Yes, it's so shallow you can walk right over to Finland," said Johann with a giggle. "And that's what I think you'd better do," said Nicholas. But by then Krister had already gone, so he did not hear. The children's sack race was about to begin, and I went over to watch it. But suddenly Johann rushed up to me, very pale, and grabbed me by the arm. "Do you know if Krister can swim?" he said. "What happens if he can't? It's deep where he goes in." I knew that it was deep too, but I, like Johann, had never imagined that there were people who could not swim, and I had no idea whether Krister was one of those. "Come on," I said, and we ran for all we were worth. Johann and Nicholas and Teddy and Freddie and we arrived just in time to see Krister wading into the sea. "Stop!" shrieked Johann. Obviously Krister did not hear. He waded out quickly, as if he really did think he could walk over to Finland. But after a couple of steps he was already in deep water, and then he disappeared. He just disappeared, and I have not yet recovered from the shock. Johann kicked off his shoes and dove straight in, and I shouted to the others, "Run and get help." Nicholas and Freddie ran. Teddy and I stood trembling. In a cold sweat, Johann was under water for a long time, and each second was agony. I was just about to go in myself when at last he came up, but without Krister. He shook his head in despair. "I can't find him." "You'd better hunt a little more in that direction," said Teddy. "That's where he went under." Then someone behind me raised a finger and pointed and said, "No, that's where he went under. And over there by that stone is where he came up again." I turned, and there stood Krister, dripping wet and very pleased with his stupid joke. But Teddy went on, pointing and repeating, "No, that was where he went under. I saw him myself." "Yes, I did too," said Krister. And then at last Teddy realized who it was she was talking to. She was furious. You should never do that kind of thing, she said, and I agreed with her. I agree, said Krister, and you shouldn't lure people out into deep water before you know if they can swim or not either. Johann had been down, hunting again. Now he came up and saw Krister. One could see how relieved he was, and at the same time how put out. Imagine trying to save a person who was already on dry land. Johann did what he always does with anyone he thinks is rather unpleasant, turned it into a sort of joke. He gave a shout and sank slowly back under the water again, exactly as if he had fainted with pleasure at seeing Krister. He should not have done that, for just at that moment everybody on Seacrow Island arrived with Daddy at their head. They obviously thought someone was drowning, and Daddy caught a glimpse of Johann before he disappeared. Johann, shouted Daddy, and threw himself in the water before I could stop him. It was like watching a film. First Johann's head came up, and then Daddy's. They stared at each other in silence. What do you want? Said Johann at last. I want to go ashore, said Daddy angrily, and he did so. Uncle Melker, why do you always go swimming with your clothes on? asked Jorvin. No one can keep her away when anything is happening. It just happens that way, said Daddy, and Jorvin was silenced. Then Daddy took hold of Freddie's ear. Didn't you say that someone was drowning? Teddy came to her rescue. The whole thing was a mistake. Krister attempted to explain, but everyone was very angry with him, and I heard what Nicholas said to Freddie. That young man's a pain in the neck, whatever anyone says. I think that Bjorn thought so too. He had realized the position by degrees, but he just went about looking miserable and never came near me. In any case, it was a wonderful, beautiful midsummer's evening, and there was dancing on the jetty exactly as I had hoped. Old man Soderman played his concertina, and we danced. All of us danced. Oh, how we danced! While the sun sunk in the bay and the mosquitoes buzzed around us. Bjorn did not dance. Perhaps he couldn't, but Krister could. Goodness, how my light blue dress swirled around as we flew backward and forward, and how I enjoyed it. Mullen, said Soderman during one of his little drink pauses, promised me one thing, never grow old. If only he knew how old I am sometimes. Secret Johann and his secret followers stood there guarding me. Every time Krister and I danced past, Johann shouted, "Take care, Mullen." Finally, I got tired of him and hissed, "What of?" "Yourself," he said, and the other three giggled. Krister did not care. It did not matter to him how much they laughed, and I must say that boy knows a thing or two. Quite uninhibited, and without paying any attention to the little brothers who were listening, he recited to me during one of Soderman's beer pauses. A pale pink rose gleamed on her brow. Among the yellow flaxen hair, a sweet old-fashioned Sweden maid. For I had pink wild rose in my hair, and I stood there feeling just like the old-fashioned Swedish maid, until Johann broke my dream. Well, actually, in some cases it's different, he said. Some people have hair like an old Swedish pig. Then all four of them looked at Krister's crew cut and giggled. Where does all that giggling in 13-year-olds come from, I wonder? But I still was not really angry with them. I did not become angry until they disturbed my midsummer night's dream down by Jansen's Creek. I wanted to dream it alone without Krister, and quite positively without any little brothers, but I was not allowed to. Jansen's Creek is a solitary, strange place. Krister and I went there when the dancing had finished. There is an old boathouse with a couple of old punts, but otherwise nothing to show that there are people in the world. Everything is mystical and beautiful and silent. Now at night a couple of swans were floating on the dark water. They shone whitely as if they were fairy tale birds. Perhaps they were, for everything was unreal and fairy-like. and in some way ancient, and one felt that at any moment these swans might shed their plumage and become heathen gods, dancing and playing on flutes. The water lay black under the high cliffs on the other side of the creek, but out to sea the water was pale, and the night was not night, but only a pale little dusk which was trying to become night. Krister and I sat on the rock. I wanted to be absolutely quiet, but he did not understand that. He thought that everything must go the way he wanted, and so he began to look into my eyes and to wonder whether they were green or gray, my eyes, that is. Then we heard a voice just behind us, followed by giggles. Actually, they're purple. That was the last straw. I was furious, and I shouted, "What are you doing there? Explain at once." "Certainly," said Nicholas, popping up his head. "We're sitting here flirting like other people." At that, Teddy and Freddie giggled for several minutes, and I grew angrier still. "I'm tired of all this," I said, and then Johann piped up. "Well, why don't you go home then? Surely you don't have to sit and flirt until you're tired." The beasts. Daddy had told them that they might stay up as long as they liked, as it was Midsummer's Eve. "It seems to me that it's a little too thick with brothers around here," said Krister. "Isn't there anywhere we can get away from them?" "At home, perhaps," I said. "I don't suppose they'd want to go there." So we went back to Carpenter's cottage, and I made a sandwich for Krister in the sitting room, which smelled of lilies of the valley and birch leaves. Daddy was asleep, Pele was asleep, all was quiet and peaceful. We sat on the sofa with the window behind us, open to the night, which would soon begin to lighten. "How can you bear to have those brats hanging around you all the time?" said Krister. And I said truthfully that I could bear it very well because I loved them, stupid though they were. "Right now I love them too, fantastically," said Krister, "simply because they're not here." Or so he thought, so I thought, until I heard those giggles again. Outside the window this time, in the summer dusk, a little procession of giggling children went by, with the most hideous hats in the world on their heads. There are some strange things in our attic. Every time they passed the window they lifted their hats politely, and giggled so much at each other's jokes that they had to lean against the trees to keep their balance. "Good evening. Have you heard that butter has gone up several pennies a pound?" they said. "And excuse me, but is this the way to Stockholm? And do you happen to know if there's any snuff left for Grandpa?" When Johann said this last sentence, Nicholas giggled so much that he really did fall over and lay on his back in the grass like a beetle, just screeched with laughter. Luckily, just at that point, Nisi came to fetch his daughters, and it seemed as if Johann and Nicholas had grown tired of the game too, and they went up to bed. I heard them clumping up the attic stairs to their room, and I gave a sigh of relief. Krister had begun to be annoyed, and I was not surprised. I offered him another sandwich and some more tea, and tried to make up for my brother's awful behavior. "A fine lot of brothers you have," said Krister. "Have you chloroformed your youngest brother to keep him so quiet?" "Thank goodness he's one of those angelic children who go to sleep at night," I said. Then I suddenly heard Pele's voice. "That's what you think. Daddy has fixed a rope from the boys' attic in case of fire. On this rope the angelic child who goes to sleep at night was now dangling outside the window, and from the attic window above I could hear wild giggles. I could have cried. "Pele," I said in a miserable voice, "what are you hanging there for?" "To see that no funny business is going on down there. Johann told me to have a look." Then Krister got up and made for the door. "When brothers begin to hang from ropes outside windows, that's the end," he said, giving up. "By Mullen," he said, and disappeared into the dawn, and that was the end of my Midsummer's Eve. Still, it was quite a good Midsummer's Eve, even so, I thought. "All right, Johann, I know you're lying behind the hedge," said Mullen, and put her diary down in the grass. "Come here, and we'll settle all this here and now. If you will carry in all the wood and water for the whole of today, I may just possibly forgive you. Live for the day. The summer ran its course, the sun shone, and the rain fell at regular intervals. Sometimes there was a storm, and the bay was white, and all the windows of the house shook and rattled. At times like this, Jorvin had to go very carefully when she walked down to the quay to meet Stockholm boat, and little Stina was once almost blown into the sea. Soderman's cat refused to go out. Soderman himself spent 3 days mending his herring nets. Sometimes it thundered. The Melkersons sat for one whole night in their kitchen, watching the lightning streaking down into the sea, lighting up the water as if it were the day. The thunder rolled over the island and out over the sea, sounding almost like the day of doom. Who would dare to sleep in that noise? I'm beginning to get tired of this night life, said Bailey at last. There was no real order at all in the nights here on Seacrow Island, he thought, though it had been quite easy to stay awake on Midsummer's Eve, because there was a party. Niece Gronkvist had explained to him that every kind of weather was lovely, and Pele believed blindly all that Uncle Niece told him. It was only when it rained through the roof that he wondered a little, but even that came to an end, for one fine day his father climbed up on the roof and put tarred paper and slates over the worst places. Mullen had said that the whole of the Melkerson family was to observe a 2-minute silence while Dad was on the roof. It certainly worked, because he finished the job without anything going wrong. But things did not go so well the next day, when he had to climb up again, because then he fell down. His children anxiously hurried to help him, but Melker assured them that he was perfectly all right. He had simply come to the sudden conclusion that this was not the day for doing the repairs. But surely you need not have come to a conclusion so suddenly that you had to fall down and hurt yourself, said Mullen. But for the most part everything was fine, and the whole summer was one long delight. Pele had already begun to dread the awful day when they would all have to go back to town. He had an old comb with as many teeth as the summer had days. Every morning he broke off a tooth and noticed anxiously how the comb grew thinner and thinner. Melker saw the comb one morning and threw it away. To worry about the future was the wrong attitude toward life, he said. One should enjoy each day as it came. On a sunny morning like the present one, life was nothing but happiness. How wonderful it was to go straight out into the garden in pajamas, feeling the dew-wet grass under one's feet, and then take a dip from the jetty and afterward sit down at the painted garden table to read a book or the paper while drinking delicious coffee. While the children milling around, he could ask nothing better from life. And so Pele was not to bother with any old comb. Pele allowed him to throw it away without protest, and when that was done, his father returned to his book, and Johann and Nicholas began to grumble about whose turn it was to wash the dishes. Both of them were convinced that their washing-up days came too often, but Mullen was just as certain that when the time for washing up came around, it would be difficult to find boys who could do such a complete vanishing trick as Johann and Nicholas. I'm sure you're wrong, said Nicholas. Who washed up yesterday, retorted Mullen, if not yours truly, Mullen. Nicholas could not understand this. That's queer, I thought it was me. Didn't you notice, said Pele, spreading his marmalade on his bread and butter. Didn't you notice it was Mullen washing up, not you? One of his wasps arrived at that moment and wanted to have some marmalade too. Pele held out his bread and butter in a friendly way, for one has to feed one's pets. Pele was certain that the wasps he knew who was their master. He would sit in his attic window and whistle to them and talk to them, and had promised them that they might stay at Carpenter's cottage for as long as they liked. He now looked with interest at the little wasp, which had begun to eat a few grains of sugar that had been spilled, and he wondered how it felt to be a wasp. Were wasps sad or frightened like people? Not grown-up people, of course, but little boys about 7 years old. How much did wasps actually know? Daddy, do you think wasps know it's the 18th of July? Today, asked Pele. But his father was deep in his own thoughts. Live for the day, murmured Melker. Yes, excellent idea. What's so excellent about it? Asked Johann. That's what it says in this book, said Melker enthusiastically. Live for the day. That's the reason why I've thrown Pele's comb away. How can a book tell you to throw my comb away? Wondered Pele. It says live for the day. That means that one should live every day as if one had only today and no more. One should be aware of every moment. And you think that I ought to stay here and wash up, said Nicholas reproachfully to Malin. Why not? Asked Melker. The feeling that you are really doing something with your hands makes you feel you are alive. Then perhaps you'd like to wash up, suggested Nicholas. But Melker said he had a lot of other things to do, enough to make him realize that he was alive for the whole day. What does life feel like anyhow? Asked Pele. Is it something you feel with your hands? Malin looked tenderly at her little brother. As far as you're concerned, I think it's in your legs. When you say that you feel as if you had springs in your legs, that's the feeling of life. Is it? Said Pele, amazed. How much there was that one did not know, even though one was a person and not a wasp. Perhaps wasps did not realize that today was the 18th of July, but they realized perfectly well that there was marmalade in a bowl on a table in a garden, and they came in such swarms that Malin grew annoyed and shushed them away. Then one of them decided on vengeance, but instead of going for Malin, it went quite unfairly to poor innocent Melker and gave him a jab in the neck. Melker jumped up with a roar and was just about to kill an innocent little wasp which was creeping around the table, having done nothing wrong, when Pele stopped him. Stop it, he shouted. Don't touch my wasps. They want to live just the way you said. What did I say? Asked Melker. He could not remember that he had said anything about wasps. Live for the day, or whatever it was, said Pele. Melker lowered his book, the book with which he had been about to slay the wasp. Oh yes, of course, but I don't think they should begin the day by stinging my neck. Then he stroked Pele's hair lovingly. You're the kindest little boy in the world to animals, he said. It's a pity you haven't a pet of your own. He rubbed his neck. It was painful, but he did not mean to let such a little thing spoil his morning. He rose energetically from the table. Live for the day, that was it, and he knew just what he was going to do. The next morning a large motorboat came chugging in toward the jetty. When Johann and Nicholas spied who was in the boat, they looked at each other darkly. I thought we finished him off at midsummer. Krister had obviously forgotten everything except that Malin was the sweetest, loveliest creature within reach here among the islands. If there had been anything sweeter or lovelier on any of the other islands, he might have gone there, but now he could think of no better place than the Melkersons' jetty. Hello, Malin. Want to come out in the boat with me? Her three brothers held their breath. Was she really going off in a motorboat? If so, they could not guard her. Malin looked delighted. It was obvious she had nothing against a little trip out to sea. How long are you going to be away? She shouted. The whole day, yelled Krister. Bring your bathing suit, in case we find a good place to swim. Johann shook his head warningly. Just you be careful. Live for the day. Do you really want to spend a whole day in that boat?" Mullen laughed. "Of course, it's much more fun staying at home, washing up and cooking. But I mustn't be selfish. I must see to it that you have a little fun too sometimes." "You'll be sorry," said Nicholas. Mullen looked questioningly at her father. "Do you think you'll get on all right without me?" "Of course," said Melcher. "Leave everything to your father." Melcher sometimes had a guilty conscience about Mullen. Perhaps she had more work and more responsibility than was right for a 19-year-old. He was anxious for her to have any fun she could. Besides, it suited him for her to be away today when he wished to be alone. "Off you go, my dear," he said. "Leave the housekeeping to me. I shall enjoy it." But before Mullen had collected her various belongings, Pele was down on the jetty. He was buttoning up his windbreaker, eyeing Krister sourly. "Hello," said Krister. "Why are you putting that on?" "You always have to wear a windbreaker when you go to sea," said Pele coldly. "Oh, so you're going to sea too? Who with?" "With you and Mullen," said Pele, "to see that there's no funny business." At that moment Mullen appeared, and she looked at Krister pleadingly. "Oh, he can come with us, can't he?" It was obvious that Krister was not anxious to have a troublesome little brother in the boat, and Mullen said to him crossly, "You don't seem to like children particularly." Krister took hold of Pele and dropped him roughly into the boat. "Oh, yes I do," he assured her. "I'm very fond of children, but only if they're girls and about 19 years old. Otherwise I don't care for them." He held out his hand and helped her aboard. "But I suppose I must be thankful that you're not bringing all your brothers with you." The two who remained behind stood looking after the boat until she looked like a tiny speck out in the bay. Then they began to do what had to be done. They cleared the table and carried the breakfast things out into the kitchen, heated the water, washed up, and put away the china. They did it quickly and well, for they were used to doing these things when they were forced to, and besides, Teddy and Freddie were waiting for them on a raft at the Grankvist jetty, and Melcher was waiting just as eagerly for them to go. He wanted to be alone, for now he was going to try out his invention, his secret water pipe that would free him from all drudgery. There were certain things that had to be done every day, which did not make life all that pleasant. Melcher considered that the continual carrying of water was one of these. Goodness knows what Mullen did with all the water that had to be carried in for her, but the water pails always looked empty and reproachful when anyone came into the kitchen. It went without saying that Mullen, with 4 men in the house, should not have to carry water. Johann and Nicholas did it if they happened to be in the neighborhood, just when it was needed and if they were told to do so. But all too often there was no one but Melcher on hand to fill the empty pails. But it was going to be an altogether different matter in the future. Melcher Melkerson had found a water pipe in the boathouse, that glorious old boathouse which housed so much rubbish. He had secretly been rubbing the pipe with sand to clean it. Now he had only to set it up. "It's a simple thing as that," Melcher assured himself, as he planned what to do. "First, fix up an apparatus at the well with the pipe at the correct angle. Second, fasten this apparatus securely to the 2 of the lower boughs of the tree. Third, attach the pipe to the apparatus with wire so that it is quite steady and pass it through the kitchen window. After you have carefully measured and made sure it's long enough, fourth, place a large trough under the pipe in the kitchen. Fifth and sixth, the water will run into the kitchen and you can stay outside without doing a thing. Of course, the water will still have to be drawn up from the well by hand, but that's a minor problem." We will still have to draw up 15 to 20 buckets of water every morning, but once that's done, we'll be free for the rest of the day, and Malin will have all the water she wants." Melker began with a light heart. The work was harder than he had expected, but he talked gently and encouragingly to himself all the while. "That's the two things going splendidly," he said when he had maneuvered the pipe into the right position. "No, three. This beautiful wooden pipe, the water flowing straight into the kitchen, and of course Melkerson's cleverness in fixing it all." Everything went well, just as he had expected, and he knew that it would all work out exactly right. He had no time to get the trough, which was a pity. He would have to try it out with just a pail. So he needed someone in the kitchen to tell him when the pail was full. As if sent from heaven, Jorvin arrived at that very moment, and Melker laughed. "Jorvin, you've come at just the right time." "Have I?" said Jorvin, delighted. "Have you been longing for me to come?" A friendship had grown up between Melker and Jorvin of a special kind that sometimes exists between a child and an adult, a friendship of two equals who are absolutely honest toward each other, each having an equal right to say exactly what he thinks. Melker had enough of the child in him, and Jorvin enough of something else. Not exactly maturity, but a strange inner strength to make it possible for them to talk together as equals, or at any rate almost as equals. Jorvin faced Melker with more bitter truths than anyone else, and he sometimes gasped at and was just about to scold her when he realized that it would be entirely useless. She was what she was and said what she thought. As a matter of fact, she was genuinely friendly and devoted, and she liked Uncle Melker very much indeed. He explained to her what a fine invention this was. In the future, Malin would have the water brought straight into the kitchen for her. "Like Mother," said Jorvin, "she has water brought straight into the kitchen too." "Oh no, she hasn't," said Melker. "Yes, she has," said Jorvin. "Daddy brings it in." Melker laughed in a superior way. This was something quite different, and a nice little surprise for Malin, he said. Jorvin looked at him seriously. "And so that you won't have to work so hard yourself." Melker made no comment on that remark. "Now you stand here by the pail," he explained to Jorvin, "and give me a shout when the water starts coming. And when the pail is full, you shout again, understand?" "Yes, I'm not as stupid as all that," said Jorvin. Melker ran out to the well, as excited as a child. He pulled up a pailful of water and poured it into the pipe. He laughed with joy when he saw it on its way toward the kitchen, and heard Jorvin shout from inside. The whole thing was functioning just as he had intended, but not quite, unfortunately not quite. The pipe leaked, and most of the water ran out onto the ground. He saw this with annoyance, but still that could be mended. Wooden vats that leaked were put into the sea so that they would swell and tighten up. He could do the same. With his wooden pipe, that is, if he had the strength to take it apart again. All that wire, yards and yards of it, which he had wound around the pipe, would not be easy to dismantle. Wouldn't it have the same effect if a lot of water were poured through the pipe where it stood? It would gradually tighten up that way. He went ahead with all the zeal and enthusiasm he always brought to everything he did, and when he had poured about 10 pails of water through the pipe, he thought the pipe really had tightened a little, or was it only his imagination? He stood there scratching his neck and watching the water as it poured out onto the ground, and then he suddenly became aware that Jorvin was shouting to him from the kitchen. He had a feeling that she had been doing so for a long time without his noticing it, and he shouted eagerly, "Is it full now?" Jorvin stuck a grim face through the window. "No," she said, "only the whole kitchen right up to the door." And then she said, "Are you deaf, Uncle Melcher?" It was clear that the pipe had functioned better than Melcher had supposed. Even though most of the water had leaked out onto the ground in transit, there had still been enough left to overfill both the pail and the entire kitchen floor. Johann and Nicholas burst in a little later and found their father on the floor with a cloth in his hands, and they asked in surprise, "Are you scrubbing the floor?" "No," said Jorvin, who was sitting on the top of the woodbin looking on. "He's just been making a nice little surprise for Malin. Guess what he's done? He's fixed up a way to get water from the well straight into the kitchen." "Out you go," roared Melcher, "out all of you." But far away from Melcher's delightful surprise, Malin was enjoying her day very much. Lived for the day, she had most of the necessary ingredients, certainly sun, water, soft summer breezes, a warm hard rock to lie on, the sweet smell of flowers mingling with the smells of the sea. All these wonderful little green islands with their bare, gray rocks, their flowers, and their sea birds. Where could one spend a better day than on one of them? Of course it would have been better without Krister, because his chatter drowned out the faint lapping of the water. His chatter began to irritate her so much that she wished he would keep quiet, but she knew that would never happen. On Midsummer's Eve she had told him she liked to be absolutely quiet and absolutely alone. Not always, of course, just now and then, she had hastened to assure him, but anyhow, sometimes she felt that she must be alone. "I like being alone too," Krister had assured her, "but it depends who with. With you I could be alone as long as you like." Poor Krister, he was not allowed to be alone with Malin. Pele did not like his chatter either, but nevertheless he had settled down near the two of them, so he would not miss a single word. He was collecting stones on the shore and watching tiny fish in the water, but he kept his ears open all the time. "I'm going over to Åland for a week with the motorboat. Want to come?" said Krister. Pele looked up. "Do you mean me?" Krister quite truthfully assured him that he did not mean Pele, but the person he did mean only smiled and did not answer. "Malin, will you come?" asked Krister eagerly. "No, I don't think I want to," said Malin. "For goodness sake," said Pele, and picked up a little white stone. "It's a fine thing to have brothers listening to everything you say," said Krister. He suggested that Pele should take himself off a little farther down the shore. He thought there were much better stones down there, but Pele shook his head. "No, then I wouldn't be able to hear what you're saying." "Why do you have to hear everything I say?" asked Krister. "Is it all that interesting?" Pele shook his head. "No, I think it's stupid." Krister was used to people liking him, not children, of course, but he couldn't be bothered with them. But it irritated him that this little half-pint did not seem to like him at all, and he wanted to know why. "So you think I'm stupid," he said, in a friendlier tone, a voice that he had so far used to Pele. "But there must have been stupider men than me who've gone out with Malin." Pele looked at him silently and did not answer. "Or perhaps there haven't," said Krister. "I'm just trying to think," said Pele. Malin laughed, and so did Krister, but not as heartily as she did. After a moment's thought, Pele agreed that perhaps there had been one or two who were more stupid than Krister. "How many have there been altogether?" asked Krister, curiously. "Can you count them?" "Of course," said Malin. She got up quickly and dove into the sea. "But it's none of your business," she said, when her head bobbed up from the water again. But Pele had no objection to explaining. "A couple of dozen, at least," he said. "They call and call and call all day when we're at home. In town, of course. When Daddy answers the telephone he says, 'This is the Melcher's automatic answer phone. Malin is not home.'" Malin shouted to Pele, "Shut up, can't you?" Then she lay on her back in the water and floated, and as she looked up into the blue sky she tried to work out which two had been stupider than Krister. but she could not reach any conclusion. Then she suddenly felt how much nicer this day would have been without him, this day and every day, and she decided then and there that this was the last time she would go out with Krister. Then she thought of Bjorn and sighed a little. She had been seeing a good deal of him lately. He was like one of the family in the Grunqvist house, and Carpenter's cottage was just a stone's throw from there. So he came about almost every day on various pretexts, and sometimes with no excuse at all. He brought fish he had just caught, or fresh mushrooms, which he put quietly on the table. He helped Johann and Nicholas arrange their fishing tackle. He sat on the steps of Carpenter's cottage talking to Melker, but Malin knew perfectly well who he came to see. He was so sweet, so polite, and so absolutely nice, and so much in love with her. She tried to see whether she was a little in love with him. She would like to be so much, but she could never feel her heart beating any faster when she thought of him. She wondered whether she would have to go through life without being in love with anyone. What a pity that would be. There must be something wrong with me, thought Malin, staring at her toes, which were sticking out of the water. Why were her brothers making all this fuss? She was never more than just a little in love with anyone. They really had no need to be so anxious. She sighed and then looked up at the sun and thought that half this lovely day had already passed, and she wondered how her father had got along with the cooking. But Melker had no intention of spending the day over the hot stove, not when we have food right by our own jetty. He said to Johann and Nicholas, "Will have stewed perch for supper." He sent the boys to dig for worms, and then he sat down on the jetty for 2 hours without catching so much as a minnow. On the other hand, Johann and Nicholas landed one large perch after another, and he did not envy them their pleasure. But after a while he began to look very down in the mouth, for he had warned the boys beforehand that they should not expect their fishing to go that well while he, Melker, was around. He only had to whistle to the fish and they would come, so they were not to be disappointed if he caught more fish than they did. But now there they sat and pulled up fish after fish in front of his eyes, and he caught nothing. It really seemed unfair that he could not get a single bite. "Not my day," he said, and stared gloomily at his float. Johann and Nicholas looked almost guilty every time they got a bite. Dad must not be disappointed. That was one thing all the Melkerson children were unanimous about. None of them could bear to see his gay blue eyes cloud over, and they clouded over so easily and for such childish reasons. They could see now that he was growing more and more depressed. He had a way of stroking his chin with his hand, which they recognized, and which was not a good sign. Finally he threw aside his fishing rod. "The fish will have to look after themselves," he said. "I'm not going to sit here holding my fishing rod any longer." He lay down on the jetty and pulled his beret down over his eyes. "If any fish comes along and makes a fuss and wants to be caught, tell him that I'm asleep and he can come back at 3 o'clock. Then he immediately fell asleep, and his float went on bobbing up and down. In spite of his son's heartfelt prayers, no fish came, asking to be pulled up, so they decided to arrange it themselves. Their father must have one fish at any rate. They pulled in Melker's line and put their largest perch on his hook. Then they woke him up with loud shouts of, "Daddy, you've got a bite." Melker jumped up and grasped his fishing rod so eagerly that he almost fell into the sea, and he shouted with joy when he drew in his perch. "Have you ever seen such a fine fellow? He's twice as big as any of yours." But this perch did not seem to be making much fuss about being caught. It lay there unnaturally still, and Melker looked at it for a long time in silence, while his sons regarded him anxiously. "The poor creature looks stunned," said Melcher. He stroked his chin a few times, and suddenly he smiled. Like the sun, quite unexpectedly bursting through dark clouds, he smiled affectionately at his sons. "Now I'll go in and cook this perch and a couple more," said Melcher, "according to my own excellent recipe. At least that's something I can do better than you." Johann and Nicholas assured him that he was the world's best fish cook, and Melcher went off to the kitchen. Malin would have shuddered if she had seen him cleaning the fish. He had a large knife and a small slippery perch, and this combination ought to have resulted in the most frightful blood-bath. But the strange thing about Melcher was that sometimes he weathered splendidly situations which seemed absolutely ripe for catastrophe. He was in great good humor. He placed the fish in an enamel saucepan and sang his recipe as if it were an opera. "Stewed perch a la Melcher," he sang. "5 fine fishes and then butter. Plenty of butter, parsley and dill, a little flour, a splash of water, just ordinary water, and salt according to taste. Salt according to taste. Salt according to taste." It sounded so good that he began to wonder if he had not missed his vocation and ought to have been an opera singer. Now and again he looked at his water pipe, which was sticking in through the kitchen window, and every time he looked at it he smiled contentedly. That was something to show Malin when she came home. Almost immediately he heard the motorboat arrive at the jetty, and he rushed out to the well to show what he had done. As a matter of fact, Malin looked as if she needed to be cheered up. She hung her bathing suit on the line and looked strangely thoughtful. But when she felt Melcher looking at her, she smiled, and then she saw the water pipe. "What in the world is that?" she said, and Melcher explained it to her and Krister and Pelle. A simple first-class arrangement it was, which from now on would make their life at Carpenter's Cottage so much easier. "Have you tried it out?" asked Malin. "Oh yes, and how have you been getting along?" said Melcher. Then he saw that Johann and Nicholas had arrived, and they knew a thing or two. So Melcher told the truth. "Yes, I have tried it out. Some water leaked on the ground, and some onto the kitchen floor, but that will be all right as soon as I've got a trough." Melcher was beaming all over. He was so delighted with his water pipe, and so proud of it, that he wanted to stroke it, and he did just that. But just where he put his hand sat one of Pelle's wasps, and when Melcher felt the pain of the wasp's sting, he went quite berserk. Twice in the same day was really too much. He uttered a roar that made Krister jump, and looked around for a weapon of revenge. There on the grass lay one of the boy's croquet mallets. He seized it, and when he saw the wasp still sitting on the pipe, so pleased with itself, he lifted the mallet over his head and brought it down as hard as he could. Then he stood there, quite paralyzed on seeing what he had done. He had not killed the wasp. It was probably home in its nest, laughing its head off and boasting to the other wasps. But his pipe, his beautiful water pipe, was shattered in the middle, and nothing more than a stump of it hung down from the wire. At last Melcher awoke from his dream, and then he hissed, "Guess what I'm thinking of doing now?" "Swearing," suggested Pelle. "No, that's ugly and uncivilized, but those damned wasps have got to go from Carpenter's Cottage, or else I go." He lifted his croquet mallet, but Pelle hung on to his arm and shouted, "No, Daddy, don't touch my wasps." Melcher angrily threw the mallet away. He turned on his heel and walked down toward the jetty. It was the last straw, Pelle wanting his father to be perforated with wasp stings. Pelle ran after him to explain and to comfort him, and so he did not see Krister's mighty deed. The wasp's nest was just about high enough to be reached with a croquet mallet if one stretched a little, and Krister thought it would be fun to destroy, that big gray mass of wasps. So he took the croquet mallet and aimed a hefty blow at it. But he missed and hit the wall next to the nest. The wasps had never heard such a noise in their lives, and they did not like it. The whole army of them came out to avenge themselves. The first person they saw was Melker, and they zoomed after him, ready for battle. Melker heard them coming and ran in a zigzag line, bellowing with rage all the time. "Run, Daddy, run!" shrieked Bele. "I thought that was what I was doing," roared Melker, and charged down toward the jetty. Krister and Malin and the boys raced after him, and Krister laughed so much that he almost choked, without knowing how much Malin hated him for it. Melker flailed wildly with his arms to protect himself against his tormentors, but he had already been given a few stings, and in his plight he saw only one way out. He took a leap straight into the sea, and his children saw him disappear below the surface. He intended to remain there for quite a time. The wasps buzzed around and looked for their prey, but all they could find was Krister, standing on the jetty, laughing more than ever. But it was strange how quickly he changed his tune when the whole swarm of wasps headed toward him. "Go away," he shouted. "Don't come this way." But the wasps did not go away, and so Krister too gave a yell and dove headfirst into the sea. He was more furious than any wasp when he came up again, but Melker, who was treading water a little farther out, greeted him cheerfully. "Good evening. You out for a walk too?" "Yes, but I'm on my way home," said Krister. And with a few more strokes he reached his motorboat. "Goodbye, Malin," he called. "I'm going now. This island's dangerous. Perhaps we'll meet again some day." "Not if I can help it," murmured Malin, but Krister did not hear. Melker met Jorvin as he came wandering up towards Carpenter's cottage, and she smiled at him. "Have you been swimming in your clothes again? Why are you always doing that? Haven't you got any bathing trunks?" "Of course I have," said Melker, "but I don't suppose you can splash so well when you have them on," said Jorvin. "No, it's much better like this," Melker admitted. But then came the glorious moment when he was to help his children to the fish stew a la Melker. Malin stood by the kitchen stove and lifted the lid from the saucepan. Oh, how good it smelled, and how hungry she was. "Daddy, you're fantastic," she said. Melker had changed his clothes and bathed his wasp stings. Now he was sitting at the kitchen table, once again in high spirits. Life was so rich. He smiled shyly at Malin's praise and said, "Oh well, they say that if men really applied themselves to cooking, they would do it better than women. Not that I mean but we'll see. Let's taste it at any rate." He served them in turn and said that no one was to begin until each had had his portion, but last of all he served himself. He looked hungrily at the white fish swimming in dill, parsley, and butter. He was still smiling as he lifted the first bite to his mouth, but then a desperate little gurgling sound came from him. Malin and the boys had begun to eat too, and they were sitting as if paralyzed. "How much salt did you put in?" asked Malin, and put down her fork. Melker looked at her and sighed. "According to taste," he said heavily. Then he got up and disappeared and went out through the door, the children watching him with anxious eyes. Through the window they saw him sink down by the garden table where he had begun this day with such great expectations. Without a word they all rushed to the door. "But, Daddy, why are you so upset?" said Malin, when she saw Melker sitting there, his face hidden in his hands. "Because I'm worthless," said Melker, and looked up at her with his eyes full of tears. "Live for the day, and what have I done? I've done nothing properly. Everything has been a failure," he said. "I expect I write bad books too. I can see that now. Yes, don't say a word, I do. Poor children, to have such a worthless father." They all threw themselves at him, they hugged him, and assured him that no children had a cleverer or kinder or better father than they. and they loved him so much. Said Melcher. He dried his tears with the back of his hand, and then he smiled a little. Aren't I strong and handsome too? You didn't mention that. Yes, said Mullen, you're strong and handsome too, and if you're that, it doesn't matter if you put a little too much salt in the fish. But Johann and Nicholas had thrown away the rest of their fish, and there was no other food in the house. The shop was closed, and they were hungry. Is there any bread? Asked Nicholas. But before anyone had time to answer, Jorvin came in with Bosun at her heels and said, Daddy is smoking herrings down on the beach. Would any of you like to come to a party? Live for the day. 1 minute there had been wailing and gnashing of teeth, and the next joy and delight. They sat on the stones around Niece's smokehouse, and the sun sank in the bay, which flushed with the summer warmth. Niece gave them golden brown smoked herring, as much as they could eat. Marta gave them butter and potatoes and home-baked rye bread. Melcher made a speech. It was a song of praise to friendship and smoked herring, for he felt a surge of gratitude in his breast. Life was beautiful, and think how much could be had on one single poverty-stricken summer day. Yes, my friends, said Melcher, it's just what I always say, live for the day. And what a lovely day, said Pele.